Good afternoon. This is RJ with the IWS podcast, and I have my man Luis here. Good afternoon, Luis. How are you doing today, sir?
Pretty pretty good. Thank you very much for having me here today, RJ.
Yes, absolutely, man. It's always good to, of course, be able to speak to another provider because it's not like we have this very large network of people that look like you and me that do this type of work. So I very much appreciate you being here. Um, I know we got to talk a little bit offline previously. Obviously, we have some questions that I want to get into and really take the opportunity for the audience, whoever's viewing or listening this, to really get the opportunity to learn a little bit about both myself and you, some of the areas that we focus on, some presenting issues that a lot of clients may come to us for, and just a lot about your experience and kind of what drove you to do this type of work. So just to kind of lay the foundation, but I want to jump right in and start a little bit more learning a bit about you and your family dynamic and sort of what your experience was growing up in your living environment.
Yeah, so my family dynamic is was very interesting. So I'm the oldest of four children. I am the only boy, three sisters. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, I know, like, that's the response, almost a universal response I get from everyone is that, oh wow, oh boy.
I only have one sister, so I could somewhat imagine, but not the same.
Yeah, it was challenging. Fun, of course, and there were a lot of memories, but just for me, at least one of the many challenges was that you're the oldest, you're the only boy. So I was instilled with messages that, I had to be some de facto protector of my sisters, but I also had to set an example for them to follow. So,
Right.
in all honesty, there wasn't really much room for error. And even just, a minor error, such as getting caught chewing gum in class or after school detention for having a spitball fight in class in the seventh grade.
Mm,
I got a lot of scorn for that. And one of those things told to me was just that, not so many words, you were setting a bad example. Don't do that again. If you do that again, you're going to get in trouble. This is what's going to happen, but you're also going to be, again, setting a bad example for your sisters. So
sure,
there
sure.
was a lot of pressure on me. And I think kind of what made things a little bit worse too was the fact that when I was 6 years old, my parents separated. So mom and dad weren't living together for some time.
Yeah.
So I kind of, in, again, this de facto type way, I kind of took the role, young 6, 7 year old me of being the male of the home. So even kind of more of a pressure, not so many words,
Yeah.
to be the example. I mean, I wouldn't say that I was fully parentified, but just still like you need to watch your sisters, you need to do this and so forth. And at that time too, I had to learn a lot of survival skills such as cooking and cleaning. So
Yeah.
very interesting. I'm also a first generation college student, so even going to college, uh, just again, a pressure in that you had to perform well, you had to set the example for your sisters, you
Yes.
had to do this and do that. And so I can honestly say a lot of it was anxiety inducing, and just it even stirred up a lot of concerns about me, doing a good enough job, and even questioning my role as a son, as a brother,
Hmm.
and even later on in life, as a father. So interesting, but like I said, it wasn't all just rain clouds and thunder and things like that. There are also a lot of wonderful moments. My sisters and I have a pretty strong bond.
And
Everyone's kind of scattered, so we see each other when we can, but the relationships are really strong. But I would say one thing of just my upbringing and those expectations, of one of many good things came from it, was the fact that we got to be pretty close,
mm,
and we know we're here for each other, even if we don't see each other for a while. We
yeah.
just still know that we're text message away, and just reach out to me if you need me, and vice versa.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I mean, I love when you can be able to lean on especially the immediate family, right?
Yeah.
To be able to develop those bonds and those relationships. But there's some definitely some interesting points you brought up I want to touch on in terms of your family and the way that you felt your role sort of evolved. It seems like maybe more so after your parents and family had separated. Because one thing I heard when you were kind of talking about maybe being parentified, I've had this type of conversation before where it seems like it's somewhat like pseudo husband, if you will, kind of
Yeah.
stepping in that role, obviously not in a romantic sense, but in terms of responsibilities and role, because if you're the sole male in the house at that time, then you're sort of walking between those realms of maybe older brother, but then there's some attributes of a husband that or a father that you might want to your mom might have wanted you to take on to help sort of balance the house. Is that at all what you meant when you were saying that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And even after my parents got back together, some years after their separation, and dad moved back into the home, even though he was the man in the house again, there was still a lot of that lingering, those lingering expectations that,
Yeah.
again, set the good example, help out with this, help out with that. And like I said, survival skills that I had learned, cooking and cleaning, that I was expected to help prepare meals, do the laundry, get my sisters to do their chores, things like
Yeah.
that. And even kind of given an authority, in not so many words, that if they don't do their laundry, their homework, yada yada, because my parents did work a lot too.
Yeah.
After they got back together, that you need to tell us, and we're gonna give them their consequences. So even that part of me, by then I was already a tween, and just like, okay, I know they're not doing their homework, they're not doing their chores, but do I really want to say something to get them in trouble, and then have them lose their privileges, and it be kind of
Right.
my fault in not so many words? So there was, in all honesty, there was a little bit of resentment towards me, because I would have to, quote unquote, rat them out.
Yeah.
So just, oh well, you're gonna tell mom and dad about this, and watch what we do around him because he's a snitch, and just stuff like that, not those exact words. So yeah, again, a little bit of tension that I think was disadvantageous to my tween years, early adolescence, in those years, in my relationship with them. But as I kind of started to do my own thing, as I got through high school, my focus was just school, social life, things like that. I
Mhm.
was playing sports at the time too. Was just miraculously, a lot of those expectations and the authority, they kind of just, it just died down, so to speak.
Okay.
It wasn't necessarily ebb and flow; it was just kind of more of like a like an ebb of the tide. But yeah, so around that time, that's when I noticed my relationship with them getting a little bit better. There was less of me snitching on them, and I guess layman's terms nowadays.
Yeah.
But because too, again, I had my own things to do, and I think the subtle message I was sending to my parents was that you guys need to step up and you need to take over. I got my own life I'm living, and of course I get a little bit of pushback from them, but I just learned at the end of the day that it's not my job to raise them. Of course I'm going to
Correct.
be there for them, I'm going to take care of them within my best abilities, within my role as a brother and as a son, but that's it. No more being a parent, no more being a second dad or whatnot. So it got a little bit better after that, and again, I think that's what allowed us to have a good relationship to
That's
this very
awesome.
day.
That's awesome. And I'm wondering, because you kind of touched on it a moment ago with when you said when your father and your mother when they got back together and your father came back in the home, so you started to be able to let those roles and responsibilities sort of come to the wayside. Do you think that that helped also benefit maybe your relationship with him as well? Not only him coming back into the house, but you being able to be more of a son again and less of a parental type figure?
Interesting. Not necessarily, because I, just there was this underlying tension. There was kind of like a tug of war
Mm,
going on back and forth, where I'm the dad. Now you all need to listen to me. But of course, when he wasn't around, just, okay, well, you guys, again, me telling my sisters you need to do your homework, yada yada, so forth. And then when he came back, from work or whatever it was, well, when we were all together as a family, and me reporting that stuff to my mom, just even in conversations he'd have with her, that, we need to step this up, we need to take over this, and so forth. He shouldn't be doing it. And part of me got it, but then part of me was like, but that's kind of my job. But again, this was instilled in me right around that time that they separated. So it
right.
was kind of hard to break that. And again, there was a little bit of tension.
Okay.
I can't say, there were any full-on arguments, or that was actually brought up, but nevertheless, that tension is just, as human beings, we can pick up on a person's negative energy, and I picked up
Right.
on that from him quite several times. And it's that thing too. We never talked about it. Um, I'd be curious to know, what his thoughts were, but just, again, just, I'm the dad, and me knowing that, but just still like, yeah, but if they're not doing what they need to do, again, that part of me is that, okay, but
Right.
I need to make sure that this gets corrected or it gets addressed one way or another. Um, so yeah, it was I guess some form of parentification, but kind of subtle, but then kind of not at the same time. It was a really weird dynamic
No,
in the end.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I appreciate you for sharing it, man. I'm asking these questions and I was asking for more detail mainly because I can imagine there's some people out there that can certainly relate to that. Predominantly the part where you said if the parents separate and then somebody sort of gets elevated, usually the eldest gets elevated to this responsibility role. And me, for like in my situation, I'm the youngest, so I have an older sister. That's why I laughed when you said you have three, because I had enough trouble with just one. But she kind of got put into the role, I guess, that you would have said that you experienced. So she was like reporting to my father about anything that I was doing, and she was kind of elevated to the motherly role because my mom passed away when we were young. So it was just mainly
No,
me, my older
sorry.
sister, and my father. But to your point though about the way it plays on the relationship, I can imagine it's tricky being the younger one, feeling like you're being told on often to the parent and then being suffering consequences. So I can imagine like how that could possibly strain the relationship between the siblings, right? But
Yeah.
but I like the way that you explained how you got elevated to that role and you sort of grew accustomed to it because I imagine you had to do it for some time, and it's maybe at some point it starts to become a part of you, and then learning how and when, maybe if appropriate, to separate that, to
Mhm.
say, hey, I want you to be like a kid again or a teen again. I want you to actually be yourself, do things that are age appropriate. You don't have to do these things. I'm sorry you had to do them in the first place, but I don't want you doing those things anymore. Let me take that over. You go back to just being a child. But I imagine in a lot of cases we don't have those conversations. So then it's just kind of, I'm like walking between, not really sure how to interpret that or how to behave. I don't know if that was at all a conversation you guys had.
Yeah, yeah, and it was just this adjustment again that with dad back in the picture, we knew that both parents were now running the home. But like I said, just kind of hard to break that when I've been programmed to take that role for
Yeah.
a couple of years. I mean, he would come and visit and what have you, and even come stay with us, but him and mom technically weren't together.
Right.
So it's kind of like he was out of the picture in many regards. Um, I can honestly say though, in all honesty, I didn't take any pleasure, of course, in just again ratting them out, telling my
Yeah.
mom they didn't do this and didn't do that. I didn't take any pleasure in being an authority figure, nor did I try to just be you know a parent type figure, but just one who took pleasure. Like, well, you need to listen to me, and I can tell you what to do. Mom gave me power, things like that. I
Yeah.
I never did. I never did. But I think just for all of us at the time, a lot of it had to do with just recovering from the shock that mom and dad weren't together.
Hmm.
We were still young, so there was a lot that we didn't understand. But when a child is that young and sees his or her parents not living together, there's a lot going on up there. There are a lot of emotions. Of course, a
Hmm.
lot of children feel a sense of guilt, shame, and blame that we had something to do with this. And I can probably go on another couple of hours long conversation about this, but
Right.
again, we were just reeling from the fact that they're not together, and so it was like, oh wow, so this is really happening, and now um, it's just the four of us. So
Yeah.
my youngest sister came after he moved back in a
Oh,
couple of
okay.
years later. But yeah, it's just like, oh wow, this is so weird. So just not being able to articulate that, even though something was there. And of course, this was in the 80s, the mid late 80s. Mental health awareness was starting to gain some traction, but not
Hmm.
as much as it is now. Even though we still have a lot of work to do now,
Yes,
but
sir.
nevertheless, still, you don't talk about these things. And then there's the whole cultural dynamic is that we don't share our problems outside of the family. We don't even share our problems with other family members outside of our nuclear family. So there's
Yes.
just this heavy weight that we were carrying, but we just had to deal with it, and which caused this weird dynamic to even feel weirder in many regards.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that you took the cultural aspect because I'm always big on considering the cultural lens beyond, like, I would say, like, you have the American cultural experience and then the subculture of wherever we maybe ethnically identify that we're from, and how those maybe cultural values and norms would play on our ability to maybe engage in conversations like this. So I'll give you an
Hmm.
example. I'm always big on being transparent. So For me, I talk a lot about not only being a man and just within the gender role, I feel not really being promoted or encouraged to speak openly about the things that we feel. And quite honestly, being minimized and invalidated, actually, and more encouraged to suppress how one feels unless you demonstrate it or express it in a physical manner. But to take it further from like a subcultural context, I grew up, my father's side of the family is black, my mother's side of the family is Salvadoran. So I experienced a little bit of a bit of both. And my experience was in both communities, there's not this sense of articulation of what you're experiencing, what you're going through. A lot of it has been seen through the lens of if you are experiencing mental health concerns or emotional challenges, to seek counsel through your faith, through your
Hmm.
church. And I went to both types of churches as well, both Southern Baptists, but I went through like Spanish speaking churches and black churches. And so for me, it's been an interesting experience growing up and then obviously working with other men and young men who are going through these experiences and understanding that a lot of it has been a lack of awareness, a lack of comfortability, and then a lack of language to properly articulate what it is that you're actually going through. And so
Hmm.
hopefully, the purpose of having these conversations is to slowly change that narrative and change that outlook so that it can be more comfortable.
Yeah.
But I do think culturally we have to be aware that that can further suppress our willingness to seek out help, right? So
Hmm.
I would like if you can touch on it briefly because you were sort of going there from your experience, both maybe you as an individual or you as a practicing therapist, can you identify some of the challenges that maybe you see like Latinos maybe struggle with when it comes to seeking out mental health services?
Yeah. This a lot has to do with mental health stigma in the broad sense, but even in the more narrow sense too. In that mental health stigma, just again, like I mentioned earlier, we made some headway in destigmatizing it, normalizing it, both seeking out support. This month is Men's Health Month, um, and also to Men's Mental Health Awareness Month is kind of like lumped into that. Last month, May was National Mental Health Awareness. So
Right.
there's the campaigns and things like that. But nevertheless, stigma is very prevalent within the society at large. So we still have a lot of work to do. But, when you look at it, even from a cultural perspective, a cultural lens, I think of just being a Latino male and the idea of machismo, chauvinism, this
Hmm.
idea of pretty much toxic masculinity, and that, a man is strong and a man doesn't feel emotions, he doesn't express emotions. It's all rooted in warrior culture and so many other things. Is that we just keep fighting, we keep going, we don't have time to grieve or whatnot. We keep going and going and going. But then for
Correct.
generations, when that's the norm, pretty much, yeah, it's programmed in us as men, Latino, and even just in my experience working with African American men too, is that gets suppressed. You don't deal with the emotions. Those things are reserved for women. So there's even that
Yeah.
chauvinistic, sexist component to it. Is that emotions are for women, not for men. You suck it up, you deal with it, and you move on. Any expression of your emotions, conveying your emotions in any way, shape, or form, especially those related to hurt, grief, and sorrow, are basically um, a minimization of your masculinity. So if you
Hmm.
cry, you're not a man. So
Right.
masculine identity, and again, this warped sense of you have to be stronger, whatnot, has really inhibited a lot of Latino and just men again amongst many other populations from seeking
Yes.
out the support they need. And I think too, just what has been a little disadvantageous, unintentionally, of course, is that when just men decide, okay, well, maybe I ought to seek a therapist, and they're looking for a male therapist, especially one of color. We're very scarce, on a national level,
Yes.
a local level, and it's like, well, okay, well, they don't exist. Maybe my problem isn't as bad as it is. That's
There
kind
we
of
go.
like a de facto message programmed into their
Yes.
minds. So, okay, out of sight, out of mind. I don't have to deal with it, but we know deep down inside that that's not the way to go. That suppressed emotions. It's like a volcano. It just builds up and builds
Yes.
them before you know it. Boom, everything explodes. So, yeah, I think just undoing stigma at the broad level, but even at, a cultural level, in normalizing emotions as being a totally human experience, is that
Yeah.
when we feel things, it's okay to have those reactions. I compare it to getting a paper cut. You get a paper cut, one of those clean ones especially too,
Right.
It's a tiny thing, but it hurts like hell for those couple of seconds. But that
Yes.
whole ouch reaction, that's what we do as people. That's how we
Right.
respond to things like that. So if we lost a family member and we're grieving and we feel like the tears need to flow, they need to flow. But that again is a natural reaction just as human beings. But
Mhm.
transmitting that message, and again in particular to men of color, that it is okay. It's totally okay to cry when you feel your feelings and emotions.
Yes.
Allow yourself to be human. Don't do the opposite, because that can just, the consequences of that can be disastrous.
I could not agree with you more. I think that, and I try to not just take peek at it just from a cultural perspective, but also particularly from a gender role perspective and those expectations, because I agree. I found doing my sort of anecdotal research, talking to people from all parts of the world, truly, and learning that a lot of them that identify as men have had very similar experiences, not only in their growing up with their mothers and fathers, but the behaviors that you just described. That like you said, grief, right? That would be probably the easiest thing that one would imagine would be appropriate to express that level of sorrow. And yet
Hmm.
we would still say, no, you need to be tough. You need to be strong for your family, be strong for yourself, be strong for others. And again, sort of immediately invalidating that experience. Like you're not allowed to then be sad, to be upset, to maybe even be angry, depending on the circumstances of what happened. And I certainly have had to go through that myself because I've had my fair experience of loss throughout my life and trying to help other people also when they're going through it, even before I was practicing as a therapist. And I've noticed that be a challenge, particularly for men, and because of the reasons that you described. It's just generally seen as not part of masculine energy or masculine traits or masculine expectations, however you want to phrase that. It's not things that men typically do or behave in. So then what do we do as the what's the contrary aspect of that? Well, in my experience, that's when, especially when you get young men, we express ourselves in probably the most primitive way you can, which is physically. Maybe we punch things, break things, scream, argue, fight, so on. And those are things that we don't like in the big picture. We don't like that men do that, but then we also are still curating and maintaining the conditions that keep us still behaving that way. You know what I mean? So it's sort of a catch 22. It's like, well, we want you guys to evolve, but then at the same time, we're not going to change some of these attitudes, maybe, or general dispositions, if you will, that make you want to force yourself to actually do something about it. And so that to me is another reason why, like, we're talking. That's the reason why I wanted two men talking, to say, not just because we're providers, but we're still men, that it is okay. It is appropriate to express yourself, but more importantly, to feel your feelings. Sometimes you're going to be feeling great. Sometimes you're going to feel pretty low. And we all have those waves that we ride at times. And it's totally healthy. But what we don't want to do is minimize or suppress or put it to the side, because we're really only kicking the can down the road, and you better believe those things are going to come up later, the longer that we go without dealing with it. So I think it was very, very poignant what you said, because I think that a lot of us need to not only hear it, but also maybe at times be reminded of it, because we might, sort of detach at times, or feel that, it's more about somebody else's pain or their struggle, so let me not make it about me. But I would argue, no, I think we always need to make that time and budget that time, really, to have those experiences and make sure that we're processing those things as close to when they're happening as possible, so that we don't allow those things to build up and, like you said, sort of erupt at random times like a volcano.
Yeah, the other thing too, I think that we need to address, um, are just educating people on these unhealthy coping skills that, I hate to say it, but in many ways they are deemed, I guess, a little bit more acceptable than crying. So drinking your sorrow away, your grief,
Mhm. Mhm.
drinking, smoking, shooting up, I don't know, just substance
Yep.
usage, is that, in our society, again, the broader level, and even in,
Yes.
the individual cultural level, that's okay. Unofficially it's okay, even though we know that it's not healthy. But
Right.
just those ways are seen are labeled as, well, okay, if he's going to drink because he's sad, okay, maybe he shouldn't be doing that, but hey, you know what, that's what he's going to do or whatnot. But forgetting that, no, that's not healthy. And
Right.
think about how that could just open up another can of worms with respect to addictive behaviors and
Correct.
everything else that comes with that. So it's really attacking that too, and just conveying the message of, well, it may seem a little weird and awkward being a man and crying when you're grieving, but again, that's a normal human reaction. It's healthy. Um, it's a safe thing to do. It's always
Hmm.
great to express your emotions with trusted people, whether it's family, friends, people who can help you hold these things, or if you seek out professional help. But going
Right.
to the bottle, or just the joints, or whatever it is, probably not, because also folks forgetting that how that could just disrupt their general lives. Period. Someone has just
Hmm.
become so accustomed to drinking because he's dealing with unprocessed grief, and he's showing up to work drunk, or just calling out certain days, because he can't get to work because just he's intoxicated. How
Right.
is that going to impair his life? Um, and just create an avalanche of problems that he doesn't need. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, part of the whole, maybe not destigmatizing necessarily, but just the awareness that we raise up is that, again, it's okay to express your emotions,
Hmm.
and being careful, being mindful that you're not turning to the bottle or anything else to help you cope with the grief and sorrow that you're dealing with.
Yes, no, and that I would absolutely agree with. I talk a lot about that with clients as well. Um, really focusing on what I would consider, because I spend a fair amount of time working in substance abuse facilities. I'm not the person who will necessarily, and I'm not saying you are either, but for those out there, I'm not the kind of person that would like necessarily demonize somebody for choosing to engage in a substance, right? But what I would always talk about, number one, from a clinical perspective, we don't want dysfunction. So if you're getting to the point of misuse before you even get to abuse or full on addiction, that those are problematic behaviors, right? We would want to address those. So I'm always looking at what's your intent, like, why are you using it? Is your intention to escape because you don't have the proper tools to effectively resolve or deal with the issues that you have right now? Because if that's the case, that's probably not a good reason to then engage in that substance. I don't care if we're talking about legal or illicit. The point is that I'm using that to run from my issues instead of actually deal with them. And I'm big on resolution so that we can have better outcomes. But for some people, it might be truly, like you sort of elaborated, it might be the beer after work, or maybe somebody smokes, whatever. I could understand what that might mean for them. But again, to me, the bigger challenge would be, why are you choosing to engage in those activities? And if you are able to function, not just I'm functioning on this substance, but truly function. I'm very well adjusted, very grounded, very stable emotionally, and I can deal with whatever my day to day stressors are, and that's something that I do occasionally. That to me is a different conversation than, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle these issues. And this is the thing that helps me to better manage my emotions. Because I would say you have a greater risk of dependency if you're going that route, which is not healthy. Because if you remove that, you're not really going to do well in your day to day life.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
but it is a very valid point, though. I think we also need to be aware of that, because sometimes we, we may be using it more than we think we are, and precisely for the reasons that we're talking about, because you're really using it to avoid an escape, not to actually deal with it. um, but to slightly pivot, because this has been very good topic so far.
Mm.
I always want to talk, when I have a fellow therapist on, is to talk a little bit about what drove them to want to pursue the field, because I always think we all have different stories and different experiences. So I'm curious what indications, experiences, or people perhaps helped encourage or motivate you to go down the path that you went down?
Yeah, so I started my career. Well, I um, got my bachelor's degree in 2003. I was a criminal justice major. My intention was actually to enter law enforcement.
Okay.
I was initially planning to, well, hoping to work for the FBI. That didn't work out. I interviewed with the Los Angeles Police Department, and I was on the way to going to the academy, but then I lost my taste for that as time went by.
Okay.
And then about a year later, after I graduated from college, I interviewed with the California Department of Corrections, and I went through the process. I was at the tail end of that process and ready to be brought on board. At that time, I was also working in a boys' home in San Dimas, California, and uh, it was difficult work. It was working with teenage boys in particular in our unit. We were a step below juvenile hall, so we would get
Gotcha.
kids from the courts, kids who committed petty offenses, but if they kept at it, they were pretty much going to juvenile hall. So,
Hmm.
of course, just being yelled at and cussed at and insulted in every way, shape, and form,
Yeah.
it really wore me down. But I still showed up for the kids, nevertheless. So every unit had a therapist. I remember our therapist, his name was Martin. And Martin was total opposite of someone our kids would connect to. Most of our kids were Latino African American youth. Martin was, as he used to say, was one of the whitest white guys. Uh, I don't want to get into the specifics of that. Those were his
No,
words.
it's okay. It's okay.
But every week, well, he would meet with the kids individually, and then they would do group therapy sessions with him. So before their group therapy sessions, they would come home from school. They'd be agitated, irritated, and of course, that's when they'd start fighting with each other, yelling at us, what have you. So Martin would call them back into his office for their group
Yeah.
sessions. They'd be, pissed off and agitated, but they'd go in there with him. By the time they left, an hour and a half later, they were smiles and laughs, joking with each other. They were on program. They did their chores, and just were able to finish out their day with
Beautiful.
relative ease. So I thought, wow, Martin must be doing some magic with these kids if before they go and see him, they're cussing at each other, cussing at us, and fighting, and all of a sudden, they're okay. So
Yeah.
I wound up leaving the boys' home. I actually didn't take the California Department of Corrections job either, too, because I realized that that would keep me away from my family. I was hoping to start at the time. I'd be working up to maybe 80 hours a week, sometimes even more, under very dangerous conditions. So
Mm.
I just realized that wasn't for me. So I decided, okay, you know what? I think I'm going to lean more into the behavioral health, social work realm. Because that just seems to be my heart's calling. I want to help people and not keep people behind bars. So I started doing work at several agencies in Los Angeles County. I do in-home support, so I'd work with the kids and the families. I
Yeah.
would teach the parents, how to communicate, how to conflict resolve with their kids, how to put them on program, and things like that. And I remember one of our former supervising clinicians, her name is Cindy Dowd. Her and I were going over a case that we were collaborating on, and I was just telling her, well, these are my interventions, and this is what I had in mind based on the family dynamics and what I'm
Yeah.
seeing, what the kid responds to, and what works best for the mom. So she's listening to me, she's looking at my notes, and then she asked me, "Wow, Luis, this is good stuff. You're not a therapist?" And I told her, "No, Cindy, I'm not." But I just thought, oh wow, okay, here is a therapist, because she was a therapist, telling me that, wow, my work is on the par up to par with what a therapist would do to conceptualize a case and formulate interventions and things like that. So I thought
Hmm.
long and hard about it, and just even again with other successes I was having with other clinical supervisors on cases, I just realized, okay, so I think of this and then think of Martin's experience with the kids. Maybe this is my calling. And again, working in LA County with primarily clients, families of color, I thought, you know what, just we're not served. There needs to be more of us. I mean, more support,
Yes.
especially from folks who look like us, to help these families, because we just think about these folks being disenfranchised by our healthcare system, social
Hmm.
service system. I think just seeing someone who looks like them, speaks a language, understands the dynamics of the culture and things like that, they're going to feel a lot safer. They're going to trust you, but they're going to get to subsequently that place you're helping them get to, with
Hmm.
you being kind of the agent of change, or just helping them out in that regard. So
Right.
that's when I entered grad school. I went on a part-time basis because I was still working. So what would have taken me 2 years actually took me 4 years. I graduated in 2010 from Pacific Oaks College with a master's in marriage and family therapy, and then I started my initial phases into the journey, and I jumped from a couple of uh, community agencies in Los Angeles County. And my last one I worked at was from 2012 until 2017. I started doing different work. I was still doing therapeutic type work, but one of the programs I helped launch with that agency was a gardening therapy program. So we had the clients
Mm,
come out, and we had this community garden next to our clinic. So we would teach them how to grow whatever was in season, tomatoes, cucumbers, yada yada. But that was their therapy right there.
that's
So we're
beautiful.
bringing people, from all different walks of life, all ages, and it was very cathartic for them. We'd run little pseudo therapy type groups, and they just love being outdoors. So it was probably one of the highlights of my career. But around that time, a couple of years later, actually, I was looking to launch my own practice just as a side gig, because a lot of us who work in community mental health, licensed therapists in particular, tend to test the waters and okay, but what about seeing clients on the side and
Right.
just seeing how that goes. So yeah, I tested the waters before you know it. I knew it. I just jumped right in. And so in 2017, I left my full-time job and I went into full-time practice and been there ever since. It took me about a year though to develop my niche, because I was just seeing everybody. I was seeing families, adults, kids as young as 5 years old. Being a dad, I think what was tough for me was just I would do play therapy with my clients. I love doing it.
Yeah.
But when I came home, I was just so tired. My kids wanted to play with me, and I didn't have the energy to give them because I was just so beat up
Hmm.
after being on the floor playing Monopoly or Candyland or whatever it was. So that, and then I just kind of go back to my own struggles in life and some things I had dealt with. And again, this can probably be another couple hours long conversation. I just realized that men's mental health, where is the availability
There you go.
of providers for men, and again, in particular, men of color, men who are dealing with things like anxiety, depression, unresolved grief, trauma? Men can definitely endure trauma as well, but again, scant resources and availability. So it just kind of
Yes.
hit me like lightning one day, in that, you know what, this is my niche. This is my niche. I need to develop this. There are not very many of us, so hopefully, with me and other folks, other male therapists, or even female therapists too, who
Hmm.
specialize in men's mental health, if we start bringing more awareness, then hopefully it changes the narrative for men, and that you can come forward and seek and obtain that support to deal with these issues you're dealing with. It's been an uphill battle, an uphill climb, because like what I mentioned earlier, the whole stigma behind men's mental health, and again with men of color in particular, but it's been very fulfilling in so many ways too. So the story continues to write itself. I'm still available. I'm still, fighting alongside my clients to help them get to where they need to get to destigmatize mental health and just raise further awareness. So I'm looking forward to several more years, decades. I mean, heck, I'm even thinking of maybe one way or another after I retire. I have a feeling I'm still going to be in the game
Yeah.
one way or another, but that's fine. Even if it's writing a book or something to raise awareness of this, I think I'm still going to be involved. But it's great, and again, it's challenging work, but just when you find those moments of success with your clients, even if they're few and far in between, those are
Hmm.
probably some of the most wonderful things I think a person can
Yes.
experience.
Yes, yes, yes. Can I agree with you more on that last part? And I like what you were saying about sort of starting to find out your niche and where you want to focus on. Because I thought about a lot about that too. And like you said, initially testing out the waters, like going from community mental health where things are relatively stable. I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna see what's gonna happen out here." And I'm gonna sort of segue into a question, but I want to. It's because I want to elaborate on what you just said
Mhm.
because of how I started to figure out mine. Like you were just describing how you figured out where you want to sort of put more attention into. I had sort of a stranger trajectory, if you will, because I kind of started off on in higher education first when I first graduated. I didn't immediately go into mental health because I'm sure you know the additional time and cost that there is post graduation, to work towards licensure and all that, which I don't know if everybody fully is aware or can appreciate. It's not just like you graduate and you get to take your test, get licensed, and move on. There's additional time you got to wait. So, for financial reasons, I had to take a little more time before I got into getting back into doing this exclusively. But what really changed for me over the past couple years really was summer 2020, and it was following the George Floyd protests and everything that was going on that summer. And I say that because for me was a turning point. I would say not only sort of like a silver lining opportunity where although it was a very horrific and tragic situation that had to occur, or that had to occur, but that did happen to occur, that I saw more of a resurgence for individuals from the communities who were willing to acknowledge that there was a lot of hurt and pain that they had largely not dealt with, and being more encouraged to actually reach out because I started seeing more intakes and more referrals, if you will. But then the second part, after I started doing that, going through 2020, going into 2021, was this idea, light bulb moment of, yeah, there's not a lot of men that do this work. I always knew, just going back to grad school, that there wasn't a lot of us that were in this type of field because you know that from school, like, because you see who's in your classroom, you're like, yeah, there's definitely not. If there is a man, it's probably doesn't look like us. So very, very small percentage. So I remember that, but that was the moment, that was the aha for me, that really kind of solidified that, oh, this might be something that you can really put a lot of effort into, because more people who look like you are actually reaching out, and they're saying that they're specifically looking out for you. And that's when I started to have that epiphany and realize that I need to pay a little more attention to my communities and my demographics, because as you said, and I would like to say as well, representation matters. When you see people that look like you, not that any particular cultural group is a monolith, because none of us are, but it is helpful because I would say there are some commonly shared experiences, usually, that we can relate to, that you don't have to then go into detail to explain and articulate. So it makes it a little bit easier then to go ahead and jump into the things that you might have been initially concerned about. And I think that that sort of lowers the barrier to entry when you first start working with somebody. And that to me is the benefit why we need more people in the field. And this is definitely not to say, as you mentioned earlier, that nobody else from other cultural backgrounds cannot do this work, because we're not saying that.
Mhm.
But I am saying that for those that might be interested in doing this work, that number one, we exist, and that we need more people that look like you and me to get involved in this work, because we know that it would be a little more comfortable if you had more men being able to talk to men, if you have the availability. So I agree with everything that you said there. And I hope that that is a point that anybody who may or may not have had that awareness or had that experience so far in their clinical journey, that we definitely have a need out here. And so maybe start paying more attention to people from your community that might start reaching out for services, because I feel like the sea is starting to change. And I never
Yeah.
felt that before. That's why that was a pivotal moment for me, because I never felt it prior to that moment. I don't know if you had any experience comparable to that you saw in your clinical practice?
Yeah. So was around the same time too, summer 2020. After the George Floyd tragedy, I noticed an uptick in referrals from African American clients. And one theme, from these clients, and these were clients, male, female, various ages. But one theme I've heard from these folks in my work with them was an anxiety.
Mhm.
I remember one lady, an older lady, she had two younger adult sons. Her constant worry was, are my kids going to be safe? They just go hang out with their friends, they work, just live life as normal adults, but are they going to
Mhm.
be safe? Are they going to be profiled? Is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? Just a lot of uncertainty. And then just, related but not unrelated, we still were in the thick of COVID. So I think one
Yes.
way or another,
Yes.
too, that was really exacerbating things. But
Mhm.
I think what really helped though, at the time, I mean, I still am doing virtual sessions. So of course there wasn't the face-to-face interaction, but just as a therapist, as you've experienced too, is whatever you're giving to your clients, even if it's just validation or that listening ear, it has to come from here. It
Yes.
really does. And it's one of those things that we're not really trained in per se in grad school or in our early career, but it just comes. it,
Yeah.
it, it happens on its own. So I think that was really advantageous in the sense that these clients knew that I'm also a male of color, different community, but nevertheless, like you, I've also experienced things like economic, social disenfranchisement,
Mhm.
racism, just being ignored. Not so many words. So yeah, and when I would just share with them or just listening to them, and that it all came from the heart, that
Hmm.
validation kept them coming again and again because it I don't think they told me this, but if I could read minds, if therapists had the ability to read minds, I think their minds would be saying, you know what, but this guy gets me. He gets me.
Yeah.
He's a person of color, and he gets our shared struggles, and within our communities or whatnot. So he gets me. He understands me, and I feel comfortable coming back to him and talking to him about my fears and anxieties and everything else that's being compounded by what's happening in the world at large. So
Yes.
yeah, that's what it was. But it's just presence, to just being able to be there for your clients. But again, even your presence coming from here, clients are really good people in general. But if we don't care, people, I think we have this innate ability inside of us to just weed that out right away, that what, he doesn't care, she doesn't care, they don't
Hmm.
care, because of just our body language, our tone of
Oh
voice
yeah.
or whatnot. And then after a while, they're just like, well, forget that. You know what, I don't want to deal with this person anymore.
Yeah.
But thankfully, with these clients, it that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case. And just it was a reminder, a stark reminder, for me, that throughout my career, regardless whoever I'm working with, just be present, and again, make it come from the heart. Make it come
Hmm.
from the heart. But also, even to reminding myself that if you don't feel a connection with your client, they don't feel connected to you, vice versa, it's okay to also refer out. I
Yes.
have this saying that goes that, when you look for a therapist, it's like buying a pair of shoes. You can have the right size, but it still doesn't fit. So, just remembering that, because it could be very disadvantageous to not only our clients if there's no established connection, rapport, but
Hmm.
also to us as well. In that, okay, you know what, we're just saving time for a client we don't feel a connection with. Maybe, just even their issues are out of our scope of practice or whatnot, but just there's just nothing there. When we could be helping someone else who we may be able to have that connection with, they could be looking for
Yes.
someone else who may be able to have that connection with.
Yes. Beautiful. I'm so big on that, man. When it comes to that, I usually say to clients, especially during a consultation, I'm like, listen, to me, number one, like we're evaluating each other. You have to choose me and I have to choose you. And I don't mean that because it's a competition, but I mean it because precisely what you just said. If we don't
Hmm.
feel that connection and start to be able to build that relationship, then it's going to be very hard for not so much me, but mainly you to be continuously motivated to make sure you're doing the work that's necessary to bring some results, hopefully to make some change. And if you feel like you're not developing that connection with me, maybe you're not going to be as enthusiastic or encouraged to take some of the feedback or the perspective that I may offer. And that could be taking away an opportunity from another therapist that might be able to help to create more of that change within you or
Hmm.
inspire more change within you. And so I don't want anybody, I usually say this, I don't want anybody who, if they don't feel that connection with me or they don't feel encouraged by the way that I do this, that I don't want you to feel compelled to work with me because there means there could be somebody better out there that is a better fit. And at the end of the day, it's about you. It's not about me. Like
Yeah.
I'll be fine if you find what you're looking for and you're able to do great work. And more importantly, you resolve the issues that you were reaching out for. That is the point of all this. So it should never be about us. But I do understand sometimes maybe when you're early on, like it's hard to figure out who you want to put more of your attention into. Again, your niche, where do you want to focus? It might take a little while, but I do pride myself and I respect you for saying it similarly, to really pride yourself on being genuine and
Hmm.
honest with people. So that way they know that they're getting the best out of you. Because the last thing I would ever want, and I, I usually demo it with clients too, is to sit there and look very disinterested. Like you could tell the person's probably close to burnout. They're just like
Yeah.
counting down the time, looking around, not seriously engaged with you. Like I would never want that to be the case. So if we're doing the stuff that you're describing, I don't think that would ever have to be an issue because we'd be very self-aware and making sure that we're prioritizing the client and their well-being over, anything that we personally want.
Definitely. I joke around with some clients at intake, our first session, but I'm serious when I say this. That look at your appointment with me today as your interview, um, to hire me. If I'm
Hmm.
a great fit, great. Okay. If not, if I'm not a good fit for you, well, you don't have to hire me. That's totally fine. So just again in that joking way, but
Yeah.
with a serious message is I just want to make sure at the end of the day you're connected to that person who you feel
Yes.
is going to, be as effective as they can be to walk with you side by side on this journey of healing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because I mean, otherwise, then to me, then what's the point? Because then you're not getting the best. To me, it's I usually consider in terms of value. Like I want you to get the most value out of being here because
Hmm.
we don't change our clients change themselves. We're just part of that journey and help, try to help facilitate the process. But if you don't have that connection to me, or you don't feel encouraged or motivated by working with me and what I've demonstrated so far, I don't want you to continue to feel like compelled to be here, because I
Yeah.
feel like then we're missing out possibly on an opportunity for greater connection, stronger relationship, and a greater ability for you to actually create the change that you want. So
Hmm.
sometimes I think it's also good for us to remind clients, like it's okay. You can get out of the way. You have no obligation to me. So if you test the waters, you're like, yeah, consultation was good. First session was like, it's okay to go find somebody else. I'd rather
Yeah.
you find that, be happy. And then, as you said, I'm very mindful of my time and having personal and professional boundaries. So I'd rather have somebody there at that time that is really serious. And that more importantly, we've started to create that connection, because then we're going to be able to do great work together. And I'm
Hmm.
going to need that if I'm speaking for myself, because that keeps me motivated and encouraged to do the work that we're doing. We want to
Exactly.
be able to see those changes, right?
Hmm.
So anyway, I like the way you phrased it, and I'm very big on that. So that's hopefully that's kind of pulling behind the curtain for somebody who hasn't been on our shoes before.
Yeah.
That to me, it's very important. It's very important to establish that right off the bat.
Yeah. How you frame things, and especially in this profession, it means a lot. It really does.
Yes. Yes, and I will add one more thing. I don't know about you, but I also have been, I would say more recently, following like last year, been getting a lot of first timers in therapy.
Hmm.
And so I really like to take my time and be very patient and thorough, because I want them to have not only as pleasurable an experience as we can in terms of the outcome. I'm sure like every session is not, great, because depending on what you're unpacking, but at the end of it, if we say, I'm glad I came. I feel like I got good value. I felt like I've learned and been able to make changes that have successfully impacted my life. That to me would be the point, because I want you
Hmm.
to be encouraged in the future if you need help, not necessarily from me, because you may move, you may need another therapist, what have you, to be encouraged to go back.
Yeah.
But if we sort of have a bad taste in your mouth because I wasn't maybe as professional as I needed to be, or I wasn't as intentional as I needed to be, then you might be a person that might say, "Oh, therapy doesn't work. Oh, that's for
Hmm.
these type of people. Oh, that's for these type of issues." I don't ever want a client that works with me to say that. So I always take that very
Yeah.
seriously. To your point about being very genuine and transparent.
Yeah, because now I'm hearing you say that. My worry would be that if a person just didn't establish that good connection, it might be kind of like, see, I knew this was going to happen. I knew therapy wasn't going to work, and this was all a reminder that it wasn't going to work at the end of the day. So they
Right.
just decide to give up on the process altogether
Right.
when they need it. They
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. And they might, you don't want this to happen, but because we know people impact other people, they could
Hmm.
potentially discourage somebody else
Yeah,
who
that's
needs
true.
it and say, "Oh, I tried it once, it didn't work."
Hmm.
So, we can impact other people. So we want to make sure we're doing our best. So, this isn't a question, but I always bring up self care and making sure that we have good boundaries for ourselves and protecting that space for us as providers. So that way we can make sure that we can be present and we can take good care of our clients when we're working with them. Because otherwise, number one, we don't practice the things that we advise other people to do. And then more importantly, I'm very big thinker of long-term impact. And I think about, if I'm not taking good care of myself, then there's a greater probability that I'm not going to be in the field that long, which means that I'm not going to be able to have as great of an impact as I could. So I'm a very big believer in making sure we're taking care of ourselves as much as possible, not only just for self, but then of course for the benefit of any client we have currently or in the future.
Hmm. Definitely. I just to piggyback on that, when I talk to people about self care, just people in general,
Mhm.
but especially parents too, is
Yes.
that just think of yourself as a cell phone, right? Um, you know, you are there people depend on you to do X, Y, and Z. But if you're not taking time to charge up, what good are you going to be to everyone else around you, your family, your
Hmm.
job, whoever, if you're not taking that time to charge up through self-care, rest, and just general good health practices. So I think, yeah, when I phrase it that way, a lot of folks, it kind of helps them conceptualize that. Oh, yeah, okay, maybe I do need to take care of myself. Maybe I do. And even again, we can probably have hours long conversation about this, but even with men, I think with men, the concept of self-care, it's like
Oh yeah.
ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. You can see it, but not really understand what it means. So
Oh
I
yeah.
think that's one of those things that we also have to start normalizing more.
Yes, sir. I'm very firm on that actually. I don't like to be very directive all the time unless it depends on the type of situation, but that is I will say, especially as a parent, I'm very directive when it comes to that. Because I like to talk about the concept of the different hats that we wear in terms of the roles that we play. So I'll
Yeah.
say like for example, like I would use you, right? I would say you're a man, you're a father, and you were married, correct?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
and a husband. So you got at least three roles. So what are you doing to make sure you're addressing each of those people? Because if we don't, then there's a deficiency, there's an imbalance that's going to creep up later on down the road, right? So,
Hmm.
for example, I'll get like a lot of moms because usually moms are bringing sons to me. So I'll get like moms and they'll talk about like how they find a lot of value working and being able to provide. And they talk a lot about their children, but I don't hear them talk a lot about themselves. They're like, oh no, because I get most of my fulfillment from being a mother. I was like, ma'am,
Yeah.
I don't agree. You were a woman before your son or daughter was here. You're still a woman now. If you don't address those aspects of what brings you joy and fulfillment outside of being a mother, number one, what are you going to do when they're grown and they don't live with you anymore? Number two, how are you going to maintain yourself between now and then? Because that means there's huge parts of your life that you're neglecting,
Yeah.
and that's not healthy. And so when you talk about self-care, to me, like that's why that's so critical. And when I talk about like relationships, like romantic and then even children, right? So I'll usually like rank them in an order because this has always rang true for me. I'm like, you're number one, you're always at the top of your tower, pyramid, whatever you want to call it. You're at the top. And then if you're married, for example, you're in a romantic relationship, that relationship would then come next. Because if you're not well, you won't do well in your relationship, and then
Hmm.
your children, and that relationship comes third. Not because your children are less important, it's just it's a hierarchy for a reason. If I'm
Yeah.
not good here, my relationship's not good, that's the foundation of the family. So then the children aren't going to be well because they're witnessing all of these dysfunction around them, and that's not the examples that we want to demonstrate. So I'm always a big believer in like understanding our roles, understanding boundaries. If we don't have them, how do you create them? The need to maintain them effectively. And a lot of it comes back to, as you said, with men, we're used to, I feel, the traditional roles of work and provide, and nobody really cares what you think. Nobody really cares
Hmm.
how you feel. Just make sure you have money, and um, sort of if you're on the child side, be seen and not heard.
Yeah.
And I don't I very strongly disagree. So I'm very much a big proponent of, no, we want to encourage men to speak up. We don't want you to just provide money and have no emotional connection to the people in your family. So we have to work really hard to create that conversation and that dynamic so that everybody is comfortable doing that. But it will take time because
Hmm.
men fundamentally, I think we're very much behind, not because we're not emotional creatures, but we just come up in societies that don't seem to value it as much or promote it as much. But I hope that
Yeah.
with people like you and I and these types of conversations, that it will become more normalized and that over time we won't be having to point those things out so much anymore. But
Hmm.
we are where we are today.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm optimistic. I
Same,
am.
same.
Um, will we see it in our lifetime? Maybe, maybe not. But just again, this conversation today, and even conversations outside of our work with family,
Yeah.
friends, people close to us, where we just address these concerns and you know point out facts. This is what we see. This is what's going on. These are where the deficiencies are. Maybe we got to do something about this. I'm optimistic that on an individual basis, one person, okay, yeah, I've been dealing with the stress for a while. work stress, maybe I do need to talk to someone, especially when I'm noticing that I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, I'm disconnected from my family.
Yeah.
Another man, who may have been or maybe a veteran, who was exposed to combat trauma and just not, when he goes to the VA, not talking to a mental health professional, just making it about medical appointments, but realizing that, these nightmares I'm having, all of these things, okay, maybe I do need to speak to someone because just this is what, again, kind of going back to something I mentioned earlier, this is what people do. And
Yeah.
it's natural that, I mean, when you have something really profoundly negative happen, that you're going to be impacted these ways, but it's okay to, again, work through these things and just get to that place where at the end of the day, it's finding and maintaining your balance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, I mean, I know that's sort of like a buzzword, I think, for many of us. And I always just say, when it comes to balance, that it's not something I think that we ever achieve. It's just one of those things that we're constantly striving for in every way
Yeah.
possible. And it's, the more effort and intentionality I put there, the more likely I'm going to maybe feel satisfied with the direction my life is heading, because I truly allocate time and resources for the things that I deem important and worthy of that attention.
Hmm.
So hopefully, like in your example, if somebody was going through that type of experience, that they would reach out for those additional services and not look at it purely through like a medical model lens, because you're gonna there's part of it you're gonna miss. I mean, probably
Yeah.
not paying attention to other aspects of how it might be impacting you. And with that, I want to ask you if there is anything that specifically that comes up for you with the demographics that you serve, if there's any particular issues that you see very commonly that people will reach out with their initial presentation. Is there anything that comes up for you that you've noticed over the years?
I think anxiety, this just transcends not only working with, clients, with people in general, with the people that I've served.
Mhm.
Anxiety. We live in a world of uncertainty. First, it was COVID, and then you had the George Floyd and all of these really awful things that happened
Mhm.
later that year. Um, you know, Now mass shootings, a war, half a world away. We're living in a world that it just seems increasingly dangerous, even though it always was. But I think with
Right.
media, social media, the pains of the world are hitting a lot closer to home. All you have to do is
Mhm.
open up your phone, social media, and if there was a tragic shooting or something like that, more than likely you're going to find out about it on social media before you turn on your TV.
Right.
So people are scared. They don't know where the world is headed, and how that's going to affect and impact them. So of course, as providers, we're acknowledging that, we're validating that. Yes, we're living in scary times, and also in my work too, I'm really trying to transmit the message that, okay, these are things that we can't control, but think of your bubble, the place you're living in. Not a bubble of ignorance or anything like that, but
Mhm.
just, your own domain where you are safe.
Right.
Despite the fact that something is happening a world away, okay. But think of how there's so many degrees of separation between you and that, but you're safe in your home. You have your family, you have your friends, you have all of these things that not only matter, but they bring it all back to, but my life is still going on despite these tragedies. It's like, even
Right.
too, when we go through grief and loss of a family member, friend, someone close to us, yes, of course we're going to be dealing with the emotional fallout of that, and we are also going to move forward with our lives. We could still honor the grief, we could still feel the grief and the emotions that come with it. And also too, we can still go to work, go to school as best as we can, of course,
Yes.
not trying to return to, a sense of normalcy right away, but we can, as best as we can, get out there to work, go to school, do all those things we have to do while still honoring the fact that I'm grieving, I'm hurting because I lost someone really close to me. So I think it's just, I hate using the word normalizing or normal or anything like that, but just really getting to a place is that, okay, so regular routine life can continue. You can also have your
Mhm.
fears and worries about these things. And also, too, you don't have to deprive yourself of finding your fulfillment in life, whether that's through seeing family, friends, engaging in hobbies, self care. There's still a life to be lived out there.
Yes.
And it's just making sure you're you're getting as many slices of that fulfillment pie or pizza that you can get, as just, again, things happening half a world away or whatnot. Okay, they affect us emotionally, but within our close proximity, unless the tragedy happens right in front of us, we press forward with life, and remembering too that life is not just dealing with strong emotions, tragedies, and things like that. Life is also fulfillment, happiness, joy, seeking that in those ways we can, those healthy ways, of course,
Yes,
but
sir.
the idea of whole life balance in that
Yes,
regard.
absolutely. And it's interesting because you're bringing up anxiety, and I would agree. A lot of my clients present that way as well. And especially when they tell me some of the challenges that they have, one of the first things I mention, because you were just talking about a lot of the things out of our control that are happening in our society and also abroad, is limiting the exposure of how much of that content that you're consuming, because that's something that we can control. Like you just said, we have our bubble of information space, and we're not promoting ignorance, but we are saying you must protect your peace.
Mhm.
And there's only so much of that information that you can continuously consume before you're going to get overwhelmed by it. And then you might feel more extreme emotions. Maybe you become very sorrowful. Maybe you become cynical. Maybe you just become apathetic, which I would never want anybody to get to. But maybe those are some of the things that come up for you just because you just feel like everything is so negative, everything is falling apart. What's the point anymore? And I certainly don't want to encourage that. And I don't believe that either. But I believe, and I tell a lot of my clients who are experiencing those type of symptoms or challenges, to protect that space. So if there's certain causes you might care about, you can get certainly make time to give those attention if you want to be up to date and you want to be informed about those particular topics. But outside of that, you have to be conscious and aware enough. I already struggle and have difficulty with anxiety. The last thing I need to be doing is giving myself more things to be anxious about, more stressors to be aware of, because that's not going to help me create peace. That's not going to help me create balance. So usually that's like a point of not contention, but confrontation at times, to say, hey, if you're like a very selfless person, you genuinely care about people, those are admirable traits and attributes. But I just need you to
Definitely.
care enough about yourself to protect that for yourself too. So again,
Mhm.
you can have a longer term impact in the future because you're not taxing yourself out emotionally and draining all of your emotional capacity now. So you have nothing left. I don't want that for them, but sometimes it can be a challenge initially to sort of reconcile those two and be okay
Yeah.
understanding, yeah, I can't be spidered into every single issue because I don't have the capacity to be able to deal with and manage myself in
Mhm.
that regard.
Definitely.
So very, very good point. And I want to end by asking you, just bringing it back to you, of any future goals or objectives that you have in your future, or maybe areas of change that you want to be able to create further impact in.
Yeah, so right now I'm working on a book. I'm writing a book related to a men's mental health issue. I'm hoping, if all works out, if I stay on this trajectory, that I'll be publishing early next year.
Okay.
But I would say, aside from just maintaining my practice, just still really raising awareness of men's mental health issues.
Mm,
I know, again, in social media land, and even some folks I met outside of social media, there are a couple of folks here and there who are promoting that, and I think we kind of need to do a little bit more. There's a plethora of wonderful resources on women's maternal mental health, much deserved and much needed.
hmm
And also too, okay, what about men's mental health, paternal mental health? Paternal mental health, I mean, that's kind
That's
of
a
a
big one.
beast in itself. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, it is.
Exactly. So, when you just think of the umbrella of men's mental health issues, that again, you have paternal mental health, you have even issues of with men in the LGBTQ community that they
Yes.
deal with, and being gay men, and just dealing with the pressures of society and things like that, but
Yes.
also too how that's impacting them. That's a whole other area of work that needs to be done, awareness be brought to just even parenting in
Yes.
general, outside of paternal mental health, but just fatherhood mental health and things like that. It's an umbrella that we're not really even opening up. I mean, we've taken the little latch off of it, but
Slowly.
it's like,
Yeah. Still like there.
okay,
We're trying to.
let's open it up. Let's open it up and see what's underneath, and just see what we need to address as providers, just to
Yes.
again, at the end of the day, normalize for all men, regardless of background, ethnicity, just sexual orientation, whatever, is that if you're a man and you're dealing with things like depression, anxiety, trauma, it is okay to come forward and work through these things. There are really good people, caring people out there. It's a matter
Hmm.
of finding the one that's the best fit for you. But there is the help. There is the help. Don't be afraid to connect with what you need in your life.
Yes. No, absolutely. And that to me is the perfect way to end this with that type of messaging. I think it's paramount that we continue to engage in this work and continue to try to create more exposure, and I would say more lanes for other people like myself or like you who are interested in speaking to this demographic, to this gender, if you will, because as we said, it's not limited just based on ethnic background. I think it's really about our role in general and the different societal pressures that we experience, but then that can get further compounded based on the cultural background that you come from.
Hmm.
But yes, we want to create the space where it is okay and it is appropriate and safe to speak openly and freely about those things, and I hope that us engaging in these types of conversations will slowly start to create maybe more of a catalyst to this reaction where we can start to see more of that change, and maybe it won't become as less common or more infrequent to have men reach out for services with
Yeah.
whoever in their area. That to me truly is the purpose of well, what we're doing here. And again, this is not to minimize other people's experience from either other cultural backgrounds or from women as a whole, because I want everybody who needs help to go get help. But I'm
Mhm.
speaking specifically to men and specifically to men of color because we are typically the least likely and the most resistant to starting that process. So I want to
Yeah.
make it very clear. We want to encourage those people to go start getting that help. And if listening to conversations like this, listening to Luis, listening to me talk about this, if it encouraged you, I truly hope that you will start talking to somebody. And so that was, again, the major point of this conversation. So I really appreciate you for taking the time to be here, to share about yourself and really give more, I would say, credence to this movement. I hope that will continue to gain traction and steam because I know how much we need it. And I hope
Yeah.
that if there's an opportunity in the future to collaborate, or maybe when you get your book published, we'd be happy to support. I think it's critical. We need as many resources as possible. You're talking about fatherhood. We want to do everything we can to create this change. So again, thank you for being here and making the time. And I look forward to us maybe collaborating in the future.
Thank you very much for having me.